Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Saucis. Yoga's entry into North American society is marked by the speech that Swami Vivekananda gave at the Parliament of World's Religions, hosted in Chicago in 1893, where he represented Hinduism. In his speech, he quoted two passages from the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most influential texts in yoga that expresses some of the core spiritual concepts of the discipline. As yoga spread from then on, it became a popular physical activity that lost some of the mental and spiritual aspects. Today, some yoga teachers and scholars are invested in bringing the wholeness of yoga back into the equation, initiating a new chapter in yoga's history in the West. I have with me today someone who has studied the history and is writing a book on the topic, Eric Shaw. Welcome, Eric.
It's good to be here, Antonio.
Eric Shaw is a lifelong athlete, yogi, and the creator of Prasana yoga, a form of yoga that blends flowing movement with static alignment, rooted deeply and consciously in the ancient philosophy of yoga. He shares his style of asana and lecturing with dynamic multimedia presentations worldwide. His latest project is a book on the history of yoga in the US entitled Sweet Limits, Yoga's American History. It reviews yoga's key events and personalities before Swami Vivekananda's USA teaching in 1893 and then tracks the courtship and marriage of yoga with American culture into the present day. Eric, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us. And I want to ask you one question that most people want to know about, and that is, how did your personal yoga path start, your yoga experience?
Well, I had a life as a triathlete for about 6 years, and in the last 6 months or a year of my practice, I had this little voice talking to me in my head that said, you should do yoga. And I ignored the voice for a number of months, and then I got a book called Yoga for Athletes by this coach of a gymnastic team, I think, in one of the Balkan countries. But anyway, it's a great book, and I started practicing every day and taking classes 3 times a week. I'm like that. I'm a gestalt guy. When I do something, I do it completely, and I love routines. So I started practicing yoga every day, and within 6 months, I'd given up my triathlete career and had focused on yoga.
Now, this was your entry into the yoga world, but interestingly enough, you bring back in a way the philosophy of yoga. Did this book, initial book you got in touch with, included it?
Not as I recall. I don't think it had much to do with it, and actually, at the time, I wasn't too intrigued with it. For me, it was pretty much a physical practice. I mean, I was aware that it had spiritual elements, but at that time in my life, I was still looking at it through an athletic lens. And I think I enjoyed the aesthetics of it, the beauty of the practice. And actually, it had moved me. It had moved me psychologically, if not spiritually. The first couple classes I'd taken actually brought me to tears. And so that intrigued me. There was something there that I wanted to find out about. It's like I wondered, like, why did it do that to me? It was curious, and so I think that pulled me in. That was another thing that pulled me in.
And when did the spiritual aspect came in?
That's a good question. Well, I'd started doing Siddha yoga, which follows Guru Mai Chidvilasananda back in 1991. And so I had an experience with the Hindu tradition from there. That was a deep experience for me. That wasn't formally connected up with the physical practice of yoga for me from the get-go, but I'm kind of philosophically inclined. I've been attracted to Western philosophy and then Eastern philosophy, and so the way that yoga was kind of backed up by the whole Hindu tradition, that must have become apparent to me at some point. I mean, I don't remember exactly when, but when I decided I made a jump to PhD studies in 2004. I wanted to study the Hindu tradition and understand the philosophy.
We'll go back to both the history and more the philosophical aspects of yoga in a moment. But first, as I said in your introduction, you have created a form of yoga, style of yoga, Prasana yoga. Tell us about this style.
Well, in about 2002, I started studying in a style called shadow yoga, which is taught by a teacher by the name of Zander Ramite. And it had a very different approach to asana. I'd studied Ashtanga, and I'd studied a mixed style of static yoga. But what his style of yoga brought to the practice was an understanding of how you move between the poses. And so I worked in that for about 8 years, and I worked with another teacher in San Francisco by the name of Arkady Shurin, who also understood that same approach. But neither Zander nor Arkady had articulated what was actually going on. They were teaching this stuff, but I'm not sure what their understanding was because they never actually talked about, they never actually had a theory for what was going on between the poses, how the movement was happening between the poses, but this is what I was taking in. So at some point I looked at that very carefully and I codified it, and I realized how it was enhancing my practice, how it was rooting me in a meditative disposition even when I was moving through the poses, which is not something that anybody ever teaches. So I began to investigate that more, and it came to a point where it felt like I was teaching something that was unique. It wasn't shadow yoga, and I wasn't certified in shadow yoga either, and it wasn't Shivanata, which is what Arkady called his work. It was something else. And Prasana is a word from the Hindu tradition which is a very simple word. It means to throw. And so there's this sense of like, how do we throw ourselves forward in the poses? How do we land in the poses? What happens between the stop, one stop and another stop? What happens between one static movement and another static movement? That's the thing that I wanted to investigate, and that's what I wanted to teach. What are the geometries that happen in the midst of pose work, in the midst of vinyasa yoga?
And what is it that happens, or what is the core then of what you found happens?
Core. Well, there's just like we have Iyengar's philosophy of static alignment in still poses, and that was further developed by John Friend, and there's other people like Paul Grilly who have added their own twist to how we set up a pose and what's critical in it. But that's still, we're just talking about static yoga in those systems. We're not talking about the kind of geometrical forms or the kind of things that happen in the midst of movement. In the midst of movement, we're actually dealing with space in a dynamic way. We're actually carving space with the body. We're actually making a range of predictable types of moves in the movement. There's wave movement. There's circular movement. Yeah. There's twisting movement. There's a way in which you activate space before you move through it. We're dealing with levels of consciousness. Yeah, we're seeing before we do anything. We visualize it. And so I want to make that apparent to the yogi. I want them to understand how we actually activate the space of energy around us, how we actually prepare it before we move, and then how do we actually move, to notice those particular ways in which we move, and therefore have a clearer and more powerful understanding of how movement happens, and therefore we can do it more efficiently, and we can do it with more consciousness.
And you spoke about geometrical forms and space. Have you found that there's also a mind correlate to this process, or have you studied mainly the physical aspect of it? But you understand, because when we are in a pose, also certain things happen in your mind, but when we move from one pose to another, have you found that there's also a change that you address?
Yeah, well, I would say in some ways it's not so much about a change, but actually it's more about how do you maintain meditative focus? Because movement, and Iyengar references this, movement agitates the mind. That's why Iyengar actually moved away from vinyasa yoga. He was taught vinyasa yoga by his teacher, but he discovered that it agitated the mind, so he departed from it. He taught static yoga. Right? So movement, something that we do all the time. I mean, if you ever, in another incarnation, another life, I was an artist. So I still go out and I draw people sometimes. It's very hard to draw people because people move constantly. We move more than we even know we move. Yeah. How often are we still? In a yoga class, maybe once in a while, right? So movement is our key reality. So studying movement is something that in some ways is much more critical for us as human beings. Yeah? And that's where we lose consciousness. When you're studying the body, the intelligence naturally goes internal. Yeah? Because there's less happening and you're not activating the space outside of you. But when you're activating the space outside of you, you're engaging with things around you. The virtis, as we talk about in the Yoga Sutras, the prime aim of yoga, to settle down the virtis, to have some understanding of the roiling of the mind, that is stimulated more by movement. So it's movement that is more key to train. Be aware of your movement, shape your movement, have some deeper understanding of a plan of movement, yeah? And then know how your consciousness interacts with movement so that it can stay properly engaged. And it doesn't fly off, it doesn't become over-agitated, you don't lose yourself in the midst of moving from one place to another. And in a formal yoga setting, moving from one pose to another. Oh, it's just this unconscious moment. One moment I was in warrior, now I'm in chaturanga. But pay attention, what happens between that space? That's a dynamic place to explore.
And an interesting one, because it is true that the consciousness drifts off as we move from one place to another. Now, have you found that, for example, we know that each mind state corresponds to a particular form of breath. So when our mind changes the internal dynamic, then there is a correspondent change in the breath pattern. Have you found that certain movements you were today describing, circular movement, twisting movement, correspond to certain types of thoughts or to certain types of mind activity or not?
Certain types of thought and certain types of mind activity. Think about how that might work. Well, I mean, when we go into a bind, say, the mind tends to become more what we say tamasic in yoga. If you think about yin and yang, when we think about internal thought, more introverted thought, or more extroverted thought, which we would call yang, some movements take you more into a yin space. Yeah, they take you more into a tamasic space, and some movements take you more into a yang space. Yeah, what we call a rajasic state in the Hindu tradition. So that there's a progression that happens, either from tamas to rajas or from rajas to tamas, that happens in the course of changing positions with the body. Because the body can be leveraged into emotional and mental states by putting it in certain positions, or what happens more often, more unconsciously, is that our mental states leverage the body. Yeah. I'm walking around like this because I don't feel good, or I'm walking around like this because I feel great. Yeah. But if I consciously do this, then I can make myself feel great.
Yes.
Yeah. That's elementary.
Yes. What would you say is the if one is the unique contribution of Prasana yoga or Prasana yoga to yoga at large?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would say it's that. It's learning how to stay grounded in movement, and also having a kind of a deeper understanding of yoga aesthetics and how they serve your yoga, right? Because yoga is beautiful when it's static, right? And it's functional in its beauty because a beautiful form is also a stable form. It's also an elegant form in which energy travels. But to do that in movement is a bit more of a complex thing. To create a proper aesthetic, a proper understanding of a geometrical form that expresses itself in space as you move from one pose to another, that's a contribution because no one's really teaching that or exploring that or giving us that in yoga practice. I mean, I feel like I offer that, and then I offer, a little bit of a deeper understanding of history and philosophy too.
Because perhaps some other teachers can address, as you were saying before, how to move from a posture to another, but to remain with the intention of a meditative to remain within a meditative intention is, yes, something that you address as a contribution. Now, do you train teachers to teach this form, or are you the only one doing it?
I haven't set up a formal training yet.
So
that's yet
right
to
now
come.
is your unique contribution.
Yeah, I mean, I've taught it in workshops, and I do teacher trainings for other people where I sometimes talk about this practice, but I've yet to really launch it.
Uh-huh. Do you include the breath in the process?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And how so? Because when you were speaking before, I was reminded of Rama Yotivarnan, for example, who is someone that by keeping the breath active and by keeping the mind engaged in the breath from one pose to another, in a way she tries to accomplish at least the consciousness, the stability of the consciousness. Do you include the breath in this, or is more of a form, more of a geometric form?
Yeah, I mean, there's a concept, actually Kepatavi Joyce talks about this, of Tristana, of how breath happens with movement, how you link breath to movement. So when we're in yogic movement, we're also dealing with this idea, what my teacher called karana, of how the limbs move together, right? One limb might move faster than the other limb, but it still has a relationship of how they move together in space. And so there's also karana in breath. Tristana, the movement of breath with the body, is karana if it moves in exactitude. So the breath is sometimes being constricted in a pose, sometimes it's being opened in a pose, and you pay attention to that quality, and it's like what the breath is doing is it's activating the circuit of the movement. It's like the electrical charge which vivifies, which wakes up the pose, which gives it energy, which is the same as in static yoga as well, right? So you're conscious of how the breath moves with the exterior form of movement. How the limbs are moving in concert with the breath.
What yoga is bringing, or what is the need that yoga is satisfying in the present American society?
Well, I wouldn't say it's one need. And I think that's kind of key to yoga's success, is that it's a spectrum. It's a range of practices which will take you all the way to God or some other existential apotheosis, some ultimate state of mind or of addressing your existence, questions around existence, or it can deal with the most basic things like your body's health, your state of mind in this moment. But all along that spectrum, it's brilliant. It's this brilliant science. You can come to yoga just to deal with your stress in your life. You can come to yoga just because you have a bad back. You can come to yoga just because your quads are tight. You can come to yoga to address a specific injury. Maybe you have tennis elbow and you got to work with that, or some problem with carpal tunnel syndrome. Or you can use yoga to address why you're here on this earth, because the philosophy goes back more than 2,000 years. So whatever level of depth you find yourself at in your life, yoga has a menu of options for you.
So you'd say that in a moment in society where we love menus and we love to click on different, yoga has them all.
Yeah, and even more, if you look at it that way, like the way that we love to click on things, we also love to click on different levels of commitment and involvement, different levels of communal connection. So I can go to yoga class and I can not say hello to anybody. I can go in, pay my money, take my class, never talk to the teacher, never talk to anybody, walk out the door. I can have a completely internal experience, or I can hang out after, I can meet somebody, maybe I can go to a kirtan, and meet people that way, or connect into a community like, say, Anusara Yoga, where a community is more focused on, or get trained in some system where I meet people in a yoga teacher training and hang out with them for months. It can be communal or non-communal. So even at that level, there's another spectrum of participation which is open. You don't have to you don't have to take Guru Diksha anymore. You know, you don't have to commit to a guru and become a part of something that is cultish. If you want to, you can. It's all there. It's all still there. All the great teachers come to America. All these amazing Indian teachers are here. All these other sciences of yoga are being taught if you want. The depth is there or the shallowness is there.
Now, you mentioned 2 times when yoga was particularly just for men. And that was in ancient times, I mean, or let's say in the middle, because in ancient times it was also the women were contemplated and they practiced. But then there was a time when it was just for men. And you mentioned that later on when it came to the West, the athletes, mainly men, adopted it. The truth is that now it's mostly practiced by women. You go to a yoga class, there's 100 people, there's 90 women and 10 guys.
That's about the ratio.
Yeah. Is yoga good for men?
Is yoga good for men? Do you think it's not good for men?
No, I do, but I want to know what you think. Or most importantly, what does yoga bring to men?
I think what it brings to men is it kind of, you know, again, working with this idea of the spectrum, it allows us to go in 2 directions at once. Because men, we have an understanding of power. Power really drives our lives, yeah. The sense of where we stand in the world is very important to us. We strive for things. Goals are important to us. We're very linear, yeah. And we drive society that way. We hold space for society. We sacrifice for society. And we work hard. We do all the hard jobs. We're laying down the pavement in the street. We're picking up the garbage. We're going into the mines. You know, more men still die in industrial accidents than women. They take the jobs that are hard on the body. So yoga serves the body, but it also serves male philosophy, because it teaches us to pursue these goals with less of a chance of killing ourselves. Because it teaches the mind to be acute, and it teaches the mind to stay focused on a goal and to move towards it with awareness, which is going to increase the possibility of you arriving there, and arriving there safely, and arriving there successfully.
So it's, in a way, it offers a deeper self-care system in order to get things done, but while taking care of ourselves.
Self-care and self-magnification. Because yoga creates power. Focus is power. The ability to work cleanly in the body and work cleanly in the mind allows you to proceed from one point to another without interruption. Yeah, I mean, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is all about focusing the mind. And Hatha Yoga, the yoga of the body, is all about keeping this energy system running efficiently. Those are 2 things that are key to attaining goals. If I get sick, I'm useless.
Yes.
I'm checked out. I'm out of the system. I'm out of the game. Right? Or if I lose my focus and I fall off my motorcycle, or I, you know, make some other silly mistake that gets me killed, I'm also out of the game. Or if I get injured, I'm out of the game. Or if because I blow some interaction because my focus wanders, I'm out of the game. So those things, the focusing of the mind, the maintaining of the energy and the health in the body, those things help all of us, male and female, in our goal-oriented culture.
Yes, and the empowering aspect of it, in fact, was in this very show cited by Joel Kramer as one of the reasons why women practice yoga, because it empowers women and it empowers people. When is your book out? Is your book out, or is it not yet out?
I'm still writing it, and who knows with these things, it's kind of an open-ended process. Maybe 2 years, I'm guessing. So your viewers have to be patient.
Well, but then that's going to give us time to have you come back and tell us more about your book and what are your efforts in that sense. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
They can go to prasanayoga.com, prasanayoga.com, or they can find me, Eric Shaw, on Facebook. I connect with people through Facebook a lot. I'm not much of a Twitter guy, but those would be ways to find me.
Eric, it's been a pleasure. I thank you for what you shared here with us today. and for your personal contribution to the history of yoga and your part in the modern part of it. And as I said before, I hope to have you again before your book is out so you can tell us more about it. And thank you for being with us.
Good to be here, Antonio. Blessings to you.
Blessings.
I'm honored.
This was Eric Shaw, a lifelong athlete, yogi, and the creator of Prasana yoga, a form of yoga that blends flowing movement with a static alignment, rooted deeply and consciously in the ancient philosophy of yoga. He shares his style of asana and lecturing with dynamic multimedia presentations on worldwide. His latest project is a book entitled Sweet Limits, Yoga's American History. It reviews yoga's key events and personalities before Swami Vivekananda's USA teaching in 1893, and then tracks the courtship and marriage of yoga with American culture into the present day. I hope you have enjoyed our show today, and if you want to let me know what you think, shoot me an email at antonio@yogiviews.com, and I hope to see you the next time.